I am speaking with John Sarrouf. John is the Executive Director of Essential Partners. Their work is to build thriving communities strengthened by differences and connected by trust. He has served as Assistant Director of Difficult Dialogues at Clark University, and he has taught in the Peace and Conflict Studies Department at Gordon College. Hi, John.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks. Let's get into it, John.
Okay.
Through the lens of your work, can you tell us what you saw while watching the presidential candidate debate on September 29th?
Well, I saw what everybody else saw, which was not much of a debate, not much of a conversation, certainly not a dialogue. I saw a lot of disrespect and interrupting, and a lot of conversation that was fueled by adrenaline and cortisol and all of the things that really make a conversation difficult to have. I mean, it's actually not uncommon. I've been in conversations like that, right? So we don't expect them in a presidential debate. We expect something really different in a presidential debate, but it's not uncommon to have a conversation like that. I've had some friends from college over last year, and there was a point at which all four of us were talking over each other, right? And this is what I do for a living. And here I am interrupting my friends interrupting me. So it's not uncommon that that happens. It's just uncommon for our public discourse to look like that on our most important issues.
So if the Commission on Presidential Debates had hired you as a consultant, how would you have approached this, knowing the president's temperament, knowing how, what he sees his strength as, which is, sort of bulldozing through? We can all, equally say that. So how would you have approached this debate? Poor Chris Wallace, by the way.
Poor Chris Wallace. And I saw a lot of criticism of Chris Wallace, and I don't share it. I think he did in the moment what most moderators would do, which is to stop the debate and to try to bring them back to their purpose, right? And that's what we teach. We teach facilitators. Our organization teaches about 3,000 facilitators every year around the world. And one of the things that we teach is to bring the people that you're facilitating back to their purposes. And he kept saying, the American people need to be served by this debate, informed and understood. That's what this debate is about, so that and understand what's going on. That's what this is about. And so let's get back to the agreements that we made, so that people can hear you, so that you can get your message across. And now, what we saw, I think, is that wasn't a shared purpose. That's not the purpose that the president came with. And so right there, you've got a disconnect. There's not much you can do when you don't have a shared purpose between the participants in a conversation. But I think Chris did all that he could to bring them back to purpose. I was actually talking to my wife, and she said, well, what else could you have done? I mean, if you weren't on national television, and you had thought about that this might happen this way, you could have said, I'm going to take a time out. You notice that there was not a commercial break.
No. Yeah.
So there was no time to sort of get up and go over to them. And you probably can't even huddle these days to say, but when we facilitate professionally and we get into a situation like that, we teach our facilitators, you call a timeout. We're going to take a break and get people are going to go out for a 20-minute walk, so that and people know the brain science of this. It takes about a fifth of a second for your body to be flooded with the chemicals of the fight, flight, freeze reaction. It takes about 20 minutes for those chemicals to be reabsorbed. So when we say, breathe for 10 seconds, that helps. It's a good start, but go for a 20-minute walk and then come back to it. Right? You don't have that when you're in the middle of a debate like this, but if you were to really prepare for this, you'd probably say, okay, I'm going to take a time out. And actually, the American people probably would have. I think the American people needed the 5-minute break.
Oh,
right?
Yeah,
right?
I did.
So, right. So I mean, it would be impossible to really to imagine somebody having the wherewithal in the moment to do this. But I actually think, in hindsight, Chris Wallace could have said, I'm going to take a time out. I'm going to let people go get a drink of water. And I'm going to take 5 minutes and I'm going to talk to each of the candidates, and we're going to try to realign for the rest of this debate, because I mean, we didn't get anywhere in the next half of the debate, so
No.
right, it
Yeah.
didn't matter. So that's what we would do. And if you were to relate it to just your life, you know, the next time you and your family are in the backyard at a cookout or something like that, and something like this happens, that's the advice we give. Take a moment, realign to what your purpose is. I want to understand you. Okay, I want to try to stop interrupting. I'm going to, you know, and if you can do the same. So yeah, but
Good advice for,
good advice.
yeah, for us at home. Yeah, for
Right,
sure.
right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that the Commission on Presidential Debates came out with a statement the other day that said pretty much what we would say at our organization, which is we need more structure to help hold this conversation. So,
And
what
that, as a professional, that's what you recognized was missing there, right?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And they tried. What they had was, you'll speak for 2 minutes, you'll speak for 2 minutes. They had some agreements that they would let them. That's a little bit of structure, but they didn't have any way to really enforce that structure, and they didn't have enough buy-in to what those structures were. So now they're talking about, you know, is there a mute button on the microphone and all of that, and they don't seem to be able to agree about that. But I think that's what you sort of saw, two things happening. One, a lack of enough structure to hold a conversation like that, and a lack of buy-in for what the purpose of that conversation was. If they shared the purpose, then they probably could have realigned each other and them, you know, themselves towards that. But if one person's purpose is to be disruptive, then almost, you know, there's very little you can do in that
So
moment.
that's where we're getting to, is you as a professional in this field are recognizing that if this one person just refuses to buy into what the purpose of the debate is, it's really hard.
It's hard. And actually what you saw was then Joe Biden had to act similarly. It's actually like the negotiator's dilemma or the prisoner's dilemma, that if we both go high, then we get more out of it, right? More people hear more of our points. If we both go low, it's a disaster like we had the other day. If one person goes high and the other person goes low in that debate, it's actually, you'd think, well, I'm going to be high-minded, I'm going to stay there. But you could see when he was trying to do that he would only get about 30 seconds of airtime for every 4 or 5 minutes that the president was getting.
Right.
And so the only way to actually even out what was going on was to go low. And that's what happens. That's the negotiator's dilemma. I'm going to compete rather than collaborate with you. Now, if we both collaborate, then we both get more out of it, right? But if I'm in a collaborative mode and you're in a competing mode, then I get taken advantage of. So if one of us is going to compete, then we both have to compete. And that's what you saw the other night. Joe just had to.
He had no choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Biden.
Yes. Right. So the next debate is not actually a debate. It's a town hall. And that is on October 15th. Of course, given the president's COVID positive test, we're not sure if that will happen. But let's assume it's going to. How would you recommend? I think it's CNN is hosting it. Manage this town hall.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that the first thing that you've got to do is try to align purposes and get the campaigns in the room, that there has to be some pressure from outside. If the individual needs support from his community to sort of align himself to the rules. And I think with both candidates, let's try to have some, both candidates will have tendencies to go to that place again and be combative, because these are combative moments.
Right.
So then the question is, how do you create a situation that doesn't feel like combat? I mean, in some ways, some of the structures are combative. You put two podiums up there, and they're sort of, on two sides of the stage, and it has that sort of combat feel to it. I think, you bring in soft chairs and have people sitting down, and right? And so can I tell you a quick story?
Sure. Yeah.
So I was doing Israeli-Palestinian dialogues, a semester-long Israeli-Palestinian dialogues on a college campus with, and there were Israelis, there were Palestinians, there was Americans there, and the first two classes were in this awful, awkward, fluorescently lit, windowless classroom with desks. And they were a disaster. It was so tense. It was so angry. People left there, like some people crying, some people just red in the face. And I went to my co-facilitator and said, we have to do something different here. Something has to change. And so I went back to my learning from the Central Partners where I studied, and they talked about welcome. They talked about atmosphere. They talked about how do you bring people into a space and change the structures that cue a different approach. So I went out and I bought all of the tea pots at Savers that I could find, and every mug that I could find, and I bought tea and cookies, and I asked for a different room. We got a room with big cushy chairs, and I set up little circles, and I made everybody tea, and everything shifted. Everything shifted. It was no longer set up for sort of debates and combat. It was set up for conversation and welcome and hospitality. So I would even think about, what do you do on that stage to change the atmosphere of the place? Where do you sit the people in relationship to the candidates, so that, of course, it's harder in these times of distance, but so that, there's a little bit, people feel it a little bit closer, and that they have some sense of responsibility to people, to not be so loud in front of them, or, not so combative, because you're being witnessed right there by people you can see much more closely, not big lights in your face, but, more relationally. So I would be thinking about all of the circumstances around the debate and how you can bring the tone of it down. And then there are some other structures, like, I would imagine a mute button if it gets that bad.
Although I heard that it doesn't work because he can be picked up on Biden's mic.
Yes, and in the room, you can still be, chattering away and trying to distract the person.
Right.
So yes, that will be less effective, but still, might.
If people think they're being muted, maybe that's
exactly.
Yeah,
it might discourage
right.
the attempt, is all.
Right.
But I'd be thinking about the layout of the room, and I'd be thinking about having people sitting down, and I'd be, all of these, and it may be one person sits down while the other one stands up to talk to people, right? And that change in status, even for the moment, it's harder to interrupt from a, sitting down in a cushy chair in the back, and even creating more physical distance between them might be helpful. So as you're in a way, when you're facilitating a difficult conversation, you are a designer of space. You're designing the way people approach, and that invites certain ways of being and discourages others. So you'd be sitting there thinking, just like an architect or an interior designer would, what do I want people to feel as they enter this room? What's going to be evoked from them by the way I set things up? And it works. It works a lot.
Well, I can see that being incredibly effective. I think that in this case, there are some exceptions. And I remember really clearly, I think it was Trump and Hillary did a town hall.
Yes.
And you remember he circled her on the stage and followed her around?
I do.
So, so this is a person who might, I don't know, we're going to need a lot of potted plants. That's my feeling.
Right. And so that's a great example. Like, they're both standing up and they're both wandering around. Perhaps they shouldn't be wearing a mic, or they're handed a mic when they speak. Yes. Right? And not when they don't have a mic when they don't speak. So you sit in the back in a cushy chair. There's one person sitting while the other one's standing and talking, and you don't have a mic until it's your turn to speak. And then there's a attendant there, who's masked or whatever, who gives you a mic for your turn to speak. I mean, that by itself might just structurally keep that kind of awkward interaction from happening. I remember that. Yeah.
Right. And keep that chair really squishy and comfy. So it's hard to get out of.
Hard to get out of. Exactly. That's it.
Well, that is, it's really great to hear your perspectives on all these things. And perhaps we can recover if there is this town hall and the next debate, maybe we can check in with you again.
I would love that. Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Bye.